Hello, we got some new cards for the upcoming expansion. First up is Princess Talanji, 8 mana 7/5 legendary minion for priest with the battle cry, summon all minions from your hand that didn't start in your deck. So there are a couple of ways to get minions that didn't start in your deck. I think most notable are the spells already in priest that will add cards from your opponent's deck. But there's tons of other different ways to get this as well. There are battle cries to discover other minions, and Deathrattles that also give you minions. It's definitely doable to get cards that weren't in your deck into priest. But is there a legitimate deck that already uses these cards and could use this battle cry to get a big tempo play? Well, if you look at it, it's 8 mana for 7/5 stats. If you play Stonehill Defender and you choose the most expensive taunt option, getting something like a 5/5 or better would make playing Princess Talanji the next turn a pretty decent play. And now just imagine if you're able to get a card like the Lich King. That is a really big tempo play with only a 2-card combo. And so while I think you can go all out and just include a bunch of thief cards into a priest deck, I think there's a lot of really solid cards that can add you just a couple of minions that you may want to hold on to and then use them with this card to make a big tempo play. No matter how you play this, it's going to be a little bit slower to try to accumulate these minions to use with this battle cry. I was very skeptical when I first saw this card, but Princess Talanji I think is actually really easy to get value from. I think if there's a slow enough tempo deck that's not necessarily big priest, then this card could definitely see play. And next up is Soup Vendor, 2 mana 1/4 neutral minion. Whenever you restore 3 or more health to your hero, draw a card. So this is an interesting card because 2 mana 1/4, while really not amazing stats and definitely not good for trades, it is a decent card that will most likely survive in the opening turns. But with its drawing ability, you can really play this whenever. And that brings me to the healing requirement, which I think is actually a bit tough with this card. There are decks that pretty consistently restore 3 or more health, and you can even say that a control healing paladin is going to come out of this expansion. But regardless of this, the decks that include heal are either warlock or usually control, and they usually also have good draw. And Soup Vendor isn't really amazing draw, but it requires some sort of 2-card combo, and most decks have better draw than that. Maybe the one exception would be for a hunter deck that doesn't really have a lot of draw. Problem with that though is they also don't really have that much heal, so I think their best bet to combo with this card would be to also include lifesteal. There's neutral ways of healing 3 in all classes, so it's not impossible to make this work in any deck. But I think basically every class besides Hunter has better draw options than Soup Vendor. Maybe Hunter is so desperate that they'll try some of that nasty looking soup, but I have my doubts. And next up is Ramble Bouncer, 7 mana 2/7 neutral minion with taunt and costs 1 less for each enemy minion. So if your opponent has a board full of minions, this becomes a 0 mana 2/7 with taunt. And what's sort of crazy and unique about the current meta is it's a board filling meta. Druid's probably the most well known for this, but you can play aggro, tempo, or control decks that end up just filling their entire board of minions. And you definitely don't need this to cost 0 in order for it to be good. Even if your opponent only has 4 minions, that makes this a 3 mana 2/7 with taunt. It's a good card to counter aggro in control, but also aggro might want to run this as well to counter other aggro decks and to just get cheap stats that can protect their other minions. The one big question surrounding this card is how much is the meta gonna change? Are there going to be a lot of decks that fill up their board quickly and allow you to play this early enough to counter their aggro? It's going to be interesting how many decks use this card and how much it's going to slow down games. Up next is Knight Taskmaster. 1 mana 2/3 with the Deathrattle. Summon a 0/3 free agent with taunt for your opponent. Silence Priest is back! So it's a 1 mana 2/3 and the Deathrattle is its downside. You get the stats early and then when it dies you have to deal with a 0/3 taunt. A 1 mana 2/3 is good, and a Deathrattle is usually slow enough that I think aggro can take advantage of this card. The free agent can actually be a target for your own Overkill minions. Your Overkill minion doesn't take any damage themselves, you get the Overkill reward, and you also deal with the free agent. I think comboing this with Overkill may be a little bit optimistic, but Knight Taskmaster is a good 1 mana 2/3, and because it's a neutral, I think there's going to be at least one aggro deck that uses this card. Next up is Predatory Instincts, 4 mana druid spell that draws a beast from your deck and doubles its health. There are some beasts that this could obviously work with. There's Witchwood Grizzly, which would be a pretty big deal. Undasta is also nice because it could help with its trade. And why not also do this with Hadronox? It draws you that card, and maybe 14 health is good with this card. Maybe a Hadronox Druid includes one just as insurance so that they can guarantee they draw Hadronox, but they already include a lot of draw in their deck in order to draw their taunt cards and to draw Hadronox. One thing to note is that we have yet to see the Druid Loa Beast God, and maybe that card will be good and even better when it has double the health. The card's only real advantage right now is that it draws a beast, and the double health isn't really a factor. We'll see if that changes as more cards are revealed. Next up is Haunting Visions, 3 mana shaman spell. The next spell you cast this turn costs 3 less. And also discover a spell. This is a really interesting spell, and it's a lot like a primordial glyph for shaman. The big difference though is that with Haunting Vision, you have to play a spell that turn, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the spell you discover. With Primordial Glyph, you can discover a spell, reduce its cost by 2, and maybe you play it that turn, but you can also hold on to it when it becomes a better play. This can be an advantage, but Haunting Visions has a different advantage where maybe you can discover a spell and that ends up becoming the right play, but you can also be holding a card like Volcano and plan to use that if you don't discover a spell that you like. You definitely want to cast a spell this same turn in order to get the value, but it doesn't have to be the one you discover. But maybe the biggest difference between the two is one is in Mage and one is in Shaman. Shaman's been getting some better spells, but they're not even close to the level of Mage. I think this is a really strong Shaman spell, and it's just going to get better if Shaman gets better spells. I want to give this card a 10, but in good conscience, because it is in a Shaman deck, I have to go a little bit lower, but I hope there's a deck that will be able to utilize this and prove me wrong. Next up is Murloc Tasty Fin, 4 mana 3/2 neutral Murloc with the Deathrattle. Draw 2 Murlocs from your deck. Is he implying that he himself is a tasty fin, or does he enjoy eating other fish or Murloc? I think he's a cannibal, that's my guess. But this is a neutral Murloc that enables more Murloc draw. It's like the card Ice Fishing, but a little bit slower as the Deathrattle, and of course the minion body is a nice touch. You have to run a decent amount of Murlocs in order for this Deathrattle to really work. A Murloc Mage has plenty of draw on their own, and maybe they'd prefer to draw a Fireball as opposed to a Murloc. On top of this, the Deathrattle is just slower, so you're not really guaranteed the 2 Murlocs, and you can't use them right away. I always assumed that if you gave a Murloc some sort of draw mechanic, then it would be pretty good for a Murloc deck. But I think there are better options. This card kind of lacks in stats, and the Deathrattle is just too slow. I want to give this card a 1 star, but I also don't want him to kill me in my sleep. So 2 stars it is. And last up is Blast Wave, 5 mana mage spell that deals 2 damage to all minions, and Overkill, add a random mage spell to your hand. So deal 2 damage to all minions is okay, but for 5 mana it's pretty expensive. But the crazy thing about this card is for every minion that you overkill, it's going to add a random mage spell to your hand. So if your opponent has a board of Silverhand recruits, you're going to get a random mage spell for each one. This card is a pretty low value board clear, but it refills your hand with a ton more value. Now the overkill is a little bit harder to get with this card. You need minions to have 1 health. So against aggro this might be easy, but against other decks that actually run big minions, it's going to be a little bit harder. That's why I think if a spell damage mage ever does come out, although I haven't seen really any support this expansion, then bumping this up to just 3 damage is a lot better. It may be a little expensive, but still I think at 5 mana this is definitely playable against aggro, and adding random mage spells to your hand will help you even more in combating them. Every meta has some sort of aggro, so we'll see what type of minions they end up playing. But if you're a control mage and you can play this on turn 5 to clear a few minions and also gain a couple of random mage spells, then you're definitely going to include this into your deck. Well, those are all of the cards for today. I'll be back tomorrow with some more cards, but until then, ta-ta.